tonight on Friday night at our Facebook and YouTube channel. I just wanted to, for those who are watching, I just would like to say that we are having conversation tonight with Father Taras Udod, Chancellor of the UOCC. And as it is a part of our kind of educational series about how our church works, Father Taras will share with us how the consistory office works, how general consistory board is elected, and generally how consistory office works, who's responsible for what, and things like that. Basically, the logistics of it, because it's very important, to understand that consistory as an office is responsible for lots of, for life functionality of our church as a jurisdiction on a higher level. Отже, вітаю вас.
Дякую.
Слава Ісусу Христу.
Слава навіки Богу.
Я бачу, що вже кілька людей дивляться нас, і ми почнемо, як завжди, з молитвою. Тобто я скажу Царю Небесний, а ви дасте благословення. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Царю Небесний, утішителю душі істини, що всюди єси і все наповняєш, скарби добра і життя подателю, прийди і вселися в нас, і очисти нас від усякої скверни, і спаси благій душі наші. Слава Отцю і Сину Святому Духу, нині повсякчас на віки вічні. Амінь. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, всечасний Отче благослови.
І нехай милості великого Бога і Спаса нашого Ісуса Христа будуть з усіма нами нині повсякчас і на віки вічні. Амінь.
Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Отже, вітаємо вас.
Дякую.
Дуже приємно. Ми щоп'ятниці, щочетверга маємо такі наші розмови. І ми завжди запитуємося людей, в якій мові ви бажали, щоб ці розмови були. As I usually do start this conversation, I always ask people, what language would you prefer? Please let us know. If you have questions for our Father Chancellor, please type them in, and Father Taras will answer them at the end of our conversation. Please you're welcome to ask the question through the conversation. First of all, Otche Taras, as I welcome you tonight, we assume that we'll start with English language, but if somebody needs to do something in Ukrainian, we'll do it in Ukrainian as well. Father Taras is very good in both languages, and he'll be more than happy to answer your question in the language of your choice. Otche Taras, so please tell us a couple words about yourself, just in general.
З приємністю. Народився, я люблю так легенько казати, що мене часом питають, people ask me, а де ви родилися, ви по-українськи говорите, ви в Канаді родилися, чи може в Україні, were you born in Canada or born in Ukraine? And I say neither, I was born in Alberta. There's a sentiment that Alberta isn't part of Canada, just like other parts of Canada. But no, я родився in Westlock, де мій покійний батько був парохом коротенький час, але головно виростав. I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, later went to St. Andrew's College, did my theology degree there, was married, and then ordained a deacon and studied for 3 years in St. Vladimir Seminary in New York. And then I was ordained to the Holy Priesthood in 1991 by then very young new bishop by the name of Vladika Yuri. I wasn't his first ordination. I believe it was Otec Volodymyr Kushnir was his first ordination, but I was amongst the first of his ordinations. І тоді служив in Edmonton, in Alberta, and then in Winnipeg for a little while, and then for 16 years in the North Battleford, Saskatchewan Parish District. In 2005, I was elected to the Consistory Board, and after 10 years on the Consistory Board with Otec Ihor Kutash, I was with Otec Ihor Okremchuk, I should say, now with Otec Ihor Futash. I was elected Chancellor in the year 2015. While serving the North Battleford Parish District, I also did my law degree at the University of Saskatchewan and hold a active practicing status in the Law Society of Saskatchewan to this day. And since 2015, as you said, Oče Ihore, I serve as the Chancellor of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, also known as Chair of the Presidium Holova Prezidii Consistorii.
It's thank you, Oče, for a brief introduction. Otec's wife is a wonderful person. She is also is a professor at University of Manitoba, if I'm not making a mistake, in nursing. So we wish her and all the people who have medical background great success, perseverance, and blessings in this difficult time, because it is a difficult time, and especially a pressure on our medical workers. For those of you who did not, I think I told it to Otec Taras, we enter in strictest measure of the lockdown was the curfew, and in Ontario, I think starting on Monday. I haven't had a chance to read all the information yet. I had a funeral, and just now we have a conversation. So, but it is going to be very strict. It's going to be for 6 weeks. So in our parish in Ottawa, we don't know how we're going to be celebrating Pascha yet. It's going to be a second Pascha without really getting the community together. So nonetheless, we are continuing with our conversation, and I wanted to ask Otec Taras just to kind of elaborate lightly on however he chooses to be fit, about how the consistory office works, what it is, first of all, how the consistory board is elected, and then how is the consistory office works as the support mechanism for our church.
Добре. Дякую, Отче Ігоре. Я думаю, without going on at considerable length, нам треба перевірити. We need to just briefly reflect on the origins as to how our Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada came to be in this country of Canada. And what's important is in 1918, a group of lay people, primarily, if not exclusively, lay people came together, and a series of meetings, Narodni Zizde, national gatherings, conventions were held. And out of these series of meetings, the decision was made to establish the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada. And there were a few priests. There were a few priests who had immigrated at the time, who were either serving in the Ukrainian Catholic Church or who were serving in the so-called Rossiyska Missia, the Russian mission. And this group of people, if you will, formally founded an organization called the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada. The first priests who were ordained, I think as many of us will be aware, were the three S's: Father Semen Sochuk, Father Dmitros Stratichuk, and Father Petros Somets. And it's a very interesting history as to how and when and where they were ordained. I've had the pleasure of seeing the founding documents, if you will, or the protocol, the minutes of the meeting where this organization was actually established as an organization, and they had a lawyer and notary public to establish it. Skip ahead, however, from 1918, 1919, 1920, and our first bishop was Vladika Metropolit Hennady Germanos, of the Antiochian, later Antiochian, at that time Syrian Orthodox Church. Was our first bishop. Later on, it was Metropolite Ioan Teodorovich, became our bishop, resident in the United States, would come to Canada. But what is significant and what I want to emphasize is by 1929, there was sufficient support for this organization that we were established by law, according to a statute passed in the Parliament of Canada, which is called an Act to Incorporate the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada. And we are probably the only Orthodox church in the entire British Commonwealth that is established by an Act of Parliament in 1929. And it was that act that set the stage, if you will, for us to gather for a sobor and to elect 9 lay people and 9 priests to be on the national governing board, which we call the consistory. And that consistory board is elected for a 5-year term at a regular sobor and held, as I say, every 5 years according to our bylaws, according to our statutes. And 9 clergy from across Canada by proportion and 9 lay people by proportion from across Canada are elected. One of the clergy is elected by the sobor to be the chancellor, and then that group meets immediately upon their election, and the 18 plus all the bishops, and headed, of course, by the primate, by the head bishop, by the metropolitan, then elects the other 4 members of the presidium, of the executive, including the vice chair, who has to be a priest, the secretary, who has to be a priest, the treasurer, who is a lay person, and the assistant secretary, who is also a lay person. And those 4, plus the chancellor, plus the metropolitan, make up the presidia, the presidium, or the executive committee of the consistory board.
Okay. So it's 9 clergy and 9 laity. Those 9 people are elected from each eparchy. Am I correct? For 3, 3, and 3.
Not quite. As presently constituted, it is 2 clergy and 2 lay people from each of the 3 eparchies. That makes 12, and then the other 2 clergy and 3 lay people, because the 3rd clergy is the chancellor. So the other 2 clergy and the other 3 lay people are elected at large. So they can be from any eparchy, and obviously they can, all 5 of them could possibly be from a single eparchy as well.
Okay, right. So once that consistory is elected, you were saying that they get together already at the sobor, and at the sobor, what happens at that point of time? Like when they get together after the sobor, do they form some kind of mini groups or breakout or groups, or do they have? You mentioned that there is a presidium, but is there committees, things like that?
The best way to think about it, or I would suggest a good way to think about it, is the sobor, the general council, but the sobor is the highest legislative body in our church, and it meets every 5 years, and it's all the clergy, all the bishops, all the clergy, and lay delegates, lay people delegates, 1 per 25 members from each parish or any portion thereof from across Canada. And that is anywhere from 350 to as much as 450, 500 people, mentrabilsha, more or less. Once that session ends, once the sobor ends and the consistory board is elected, according to our bylaws, according to our practice, the business of the church, the temporal affairs of the church, are administered by what essentially amounts to a soborchik, a small sobor, that gathers at least once a year, usually twice a year, and that's the consistory board. And so it gathers, and historically, traditionally, twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, okay, to do the work or to guide the work of the executive committee, and most significantly, to fulfill the resolutions of the sabor that has given it its mandate. In between meetings of the consistory board, you have the meetings and work of the executive committee, which up until 2005 was always elected from consistory board members in or very near Winnipeg. So I say 2005 because a little thing called the internet came along before that, and so now we have presidium members across Canada, as we do obviously consistory board members.
So Sobor basically mandates the consistory a certain agenda, right? And
That's
then
correct.
those people who are elected, there are many Sobor basically, they're to implement that agenda in those.
That's correct.
Okay, and they, of course, from if my memory serves me right, there's a number of committees, right, on the consistory, and amongst the consistory board members, people are allocate or volunteer to work in certain committees, right?
That is correct. That is correct. And in a somewhat earlier time, we did have when the membership numbers were higher than they are now, unfortunately, but when they were higher, we had consistory board committees. We even have a few standing committees, which are actually committees of the sabor. So there's two of those, and that is the Standing Committee on Bylaws, and we have the Standing Committee, the Joint Standing Committee, UOCC, USRL, Joint Standing Committee, which is actually a committee of the sabor. Plus, we do have the internal, we have the Audit Committee, what we used to call Kontrolna Komisija. This is a committee of the sabor, elected by the sabor. But in response to your specific question, Oche Ihore, yes, the consistory board then chooses from amongst itself a series of committee chairs, and the committee chairs historically need to be consistory board members, but not all members of the committee of the consistory board need to be consistory board members. So that's the practice really into the first 20 years of this century, and that all flows from the extensive work that was entitled Vision 2000 in preparation for the 20th Sabor, which took place in the year 2000.
Okay. Oche, Taras, I'm asking you those questions because I really would like it to be explained quite well to people who are watching, so maybe there will be a questions. Please do not hesitate to ask questions. But Father Taras is in a good position probably the best position to explain that work, as he is the chair or the chancellor of our church. Okay, so having said that, Oche Taras, how does the office of the consistory work? Like they generally, not the building, but ideally, how would it work?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good good segue, good connection to the to this next part of our discussion. the reason I gave some initial history there, and I think it's important to put a little bit more context to the work and, most importantly, service of our office of the consistory, because the genesis, the very principle, the very idea of a consistory office, a functioning head office, if you will, of the national organization that we know as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, really had its origins in serving the clergy and the lay leaders in the parishes, initially, of course, across Western Canada, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and later then in Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia. And where that was, if you will, I think particularly crystallized, was in the person of Father Semen Sauchuk, who was the Holova Presidii Consistorii. I don't know if you're even aware of this, Oche Ihore, for a total of 37 years. Not consecutive, but 37 years. And in the 37 years that he was Holova Presidii Consistorii, that does not include the years in which he was served as Zastupnik Holove Presidii Consistorii, the vice chair of the Presidium. But where that idea of service in particular, and my hat, my niski poklin, as we would say in Ukrainian, with a deep bow of reverence and gratitude, where Father Sauchuk particularly served our church and served our country, indeed, he was the first Ukrainian Orthodox chaplain of His Majesty's forces, and served as a chaplain during the Second World War, and even was in continental Europe. As a result of that service, and as a result of being there, he was then able to, as we would say in Ukrainian, sprijiniti, to foster the advent, the coming to Canada, first of all, of Bishop and then Archbishop Mstislav Skripnik, later Patriarch Mstislav, and then also sprijinil, fostered the advent and election of Metropolitan Ilarion Ohienko as the first Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada. And the reason I draw attention to that is because it was that era in particular, after the Second World War, that our church not only physically grew in numbers, in size, but also grew in this idea of service. And it was Metropolite Ilarion who called the entire church, and specifically the office of the consistory board, if you will, the presidium, slужити народові, це служити Богові. We serve the people, the narod, our nation, but we serve people as the way to serve God. And really fostered this sense